Hey, good morning class. Today I just wanted to share a recipe with you. It's actually a recipe that was shared with me a couple years ago from a student. And so the recipe is for Indian cookies. And some of you may have had these before. Some of you may have made them before. And as a class, we were supposed to make them this week. So I thought I could just make them at home and show you how. So I'll share the recipe with you on the website. And in the meantime, I will just do a little bit of a demonstration. And if you're able to, you can always try this at home. Okay? So to start off, I've already preheated my oven. I've already washed my hands, of course, and I've put some parchment paper down on the cookie sheet. The oven actually preheats to 450 degrees, which is pretty hot, but for these cookies, it seems to work. So we start off with some shortening. So I've already got a half a cup of shortening measured here, and we're gonna just mix some of this in our stand mixer, some of it in a bowl. So it might be a little loud for a second, but the shortening, if you didn't have shortening, you could always use butter or margarine. But I like shortening for this. It's just the way that the recipe was written for me and how I've always done it. So we'll mix up some shortening, and then we're gonna add some sugar and some nutmeg, okay? So the sugar in this recipe is brown sugar. So I've pre-measured my 1 cup of brown sugar. And sometimes people use a bit of brown and a bit of white. It doesn't really matter. It depends on the recipe. There's a bit of debate. Sometimes I've had students say, Miss P, I'm not going to do the recipe that you have. I'm going to bring in my own family's recipe because our Indian cookies are probably better than yours. I don't take offense to it because this is just one that was shared with me. The spice that goes into these cookies is nutmeg. And nutmeg, it's a really kind of earthy tasting spice, but I really like it. I've also added a little bit of cinnamon to these because some of my students in the past have said they use cinnamon as well or in place of nutmeg. So we'll just mix this up. And then after that, we're gonna mix in some buttermilk. So I've got my buttermilk, 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk already measured. And if you don't have real buttermilk at home, it doesn't matter. You can use milk and then add lemon juice or vinegar, probably like 2 teaspoons of lemon juice or vinegar to just regular milk. And it will do the same thing as the buttermilk because it's essentially like making it more acidic. Because buttermilk has a higher proportion of lactic acid than regular milk. And so that's why you need the vinegar or the lemon juice to make it more acidic. And then that acid is going to react with the baking soda that we add to these cookies. So I'm mixing that up. It looks not too bad. And then the next step we will do is the dry ingredients, which will just go in a separate bowl for now. So I'll turn this off so it gets a little quieter. What we need to do is mix in flour, salt, baking soda. And so what I will do is start with just 1 cup of flour because this recipe that I was given when my student's grandma wrote it out for me, she wrote down a cup of flour plus more. And so I didn't know what plus more would mean, how much more. So I always start with 1 cup and then I just keep adding until we get the right consistency of dough. So we'll start with that. And I've already measured my 1/4 teaspoon salt and 1/2 teaspoon baking soda in here. And we'll just get that mixed up. And then, let me get a whisk. I feel like we should whisk this together before I put it into the mixer. So it says to mix together flour, salt, baking soda, add to the first mixture, and then stir in the vanilla. And then you add more flour until it becomes a nice dough, and a dough that we can roll out. And so these cookies, they're not going to be the texture of a rolled sugar cookie or anything like that. They're almost a little bit like a biscuit, I would say, the final texture. So they're called cookies, but they're a little bit cakier than a cookie you might be used to. They're just different, I guess I would say. And then a lot of Indian cookies contain currants or raisins. I'm not gonna add those today just because I personally don't love them. But sometimes I have students who made these for me at home and brought them in and they've had currants in them and they've been pretty good. If my family's going to eat these, they'll probably prefer not having currants or raisins in there, but a lot of times they have currants. So I'm just, as you can see, adding more flour because it's too wet. So I usually end up adding at least 3 cups of flour. So I've already got 2 in there, and it's still looking pretty wet to me. And I'm gonna add my next cup and just see how that goes. If you have a mixer like this, they're awesome. You can use a dough hook even once it starts getting really stiff, but I'm just going to keep going with the paddle here. It's looking pretty good. I'll add the rest of this cup, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like. So this dough is starting to get just a little bit stiffer. You can see that, and it's got to be a nice consistency that I can roll it out. I think it's still just a little too wet, a little too soft, but that's okay. We can just add a bit more flour when we mix it out. And if I have to, I will use a dough hook, but just by the touch, it's sticking to my hands. I would like to add more flour. So more flour. I'm already at 3 cups. We'll try 3.5 and see how that goes. And then we're gonna end up rolling it out on this surface, cutting it just with a round cookie cutter, okay? Let me pause for a second. I'll get this rolled out so you can see what it's gonna look like. I'll show you how to cut it, and then we'll get them baked. Okay, so we're back, and I've got the dough out of the mixer. So you can see what it feels like. You can see that it's just something that's not sticking to my hands anymore, and it's nice to work with. So I'm gonna just kind of press it out and put some flour down on my counter just to keep it from sticking. And I got my favorite rolling pin, and I'm just gonna roll it out. The recipe says about a 1/2 inch thick, and I really don't wanna go any thinner than that because, like I said, they're almost a little bit like a biscuit, kind of a tea biscuit type of a texture. And so you don't want to go too thin or they're going to cook too fast, especially at that 450-degree oven. So roll it out, and then you're just going to use a round cookie cutter to cut these, or biscuit cutter if you want to call them that. So about 1/2 inch thick. It's looking pretty good. And then some of my students have told me too, if they didn't have a round cookie cutter, sometimes they just use the bottom of a glass with their grandma, and the same thing, cuts them, works out well. So we'll get these kind of cut, and then we'll throw them on a cookie sheet and get these in the oven. Sometimes with the labs that we were supposed to do this week, we've been talking about Canadian food heritage, and I give students sometimes a choice about what to make. Sometimes we just all do the Indian cookies, and then sometimes students have done other Canadian desserts like butter tarts or Nanaimo bars, but it just depends. These are a nice thing. They're pretty easy thing, and a lot of students have had them before or just want to try them because they haven't had them. So I've got these cut. Get out my cookie sheet with parchment paper, and we'll just put them nicely. Usually a general rule of thumb when you're making cookies is to put about a dozen on a cookie sheet at the time, because you want them spread out just in case they expand into each other, because you don't want them touching. And also with cookies, the key to get an even bake is to have an even thickness and to have just an even size overall. Some people, if they're really particular, will weigh out cookies or dough to make sure that they've got exactly the right number of grams even for each one, but we're not going to be that particular. We know we've got a nice size, a nice thickness, and now these can go into the oven. So I will pause again and I will show you what they look like when they come back out. Hey guys, I'm back. Anyway, I've got the cookies out of the oven so you can kind of see what they look like. They took about 10-11 minutes at 450 degrees just to give you an idea. The final product, you'll have sort of a bit of a golden brown bottom, and they've got a slightly brown color, partly because I used brown sugar and it's got the cinnamon and nutmeg in there. So it's nice and kind of a spicy cookie, but also you'll notice, I mean, they're still warm, but they're going to be soft and a little bit cakey, but they'll go perfect with an afternoon cup of tea or coffee if that's something you drink. Anyway, you guys can give me suggestions for some other videos. that you'd like me to demonstrate, some other recipes, or also just pick some stuff that we were supposed to cook over the next couple weeks. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this today, and if you have the chance, make these at home, and you can always let me know how it went or send me a picture. Have a great day.